The scroll was unearthed during the Ming Dynasty, though it is far older. There is a spot here. The writing says that if you pierce it, apocalypse will be no more.
There are only but so many ways to kill a giant. For to kill a giant is to kill the moon. One of the most common ways, if not the most used way, is to attack the neck, for the TitanNeck is the known weak spot. You see, all giant stories encode the moon, and all Titan stories encode the supermoon. And what best way to attack the moon?
I'll show you the dark side.
In these Titan stories, we see that the neck is used to negotiate, to threaten, and to end certain characters.
This one's for you, Morph.
The neck is used in many moon stories, including Buck Moon stories, honeymoon stories, and even blood moon stories. And in these stories, what you'll notice is that the smaller character will almost always instinctively jump on the largest character back to try to get access to their thoracic cavity, to their neck, or to their trapeze area. Access to this area is not only used to injure or harm the Titan, it could also be used to tame or control or persuade the Titan. And we see that the neck is not the only area of a Titan's body used to control, persuade, and or influence the Titan. We also see that some Titan stories use the shoulders, the thorax where the heart is located, and even the mind. And these are reoccurring themes when taking down the Titan, but also when controlling or working with the Titan. And this even applies to man Titans, where the Titan is something that is being manned or controlled by a living being, or other living beings are housed inside of the Titan. But this even applies to machines that are Titans. And it's important that we don't only think of Titans as living beings, where Titans can also be machines, they can also be vehicles, and even inanimate objects. When we can recognize that Titans and Giants are a retelling of the moon, our characters are items that are personifying the moon. Whether living or non-living, they are retelling the story about the sky and the character. This standing on the shoulders of Titan idea is an allegory for us, in which we're shown to overcome by making it to the top of the giant, but also an allegory for which it's showing that we are supported or elevated by being at the top of that giant. It is not a coincidence that the same places that we attack a Titan happen to also be the same places where we can sit on, accompany, or influence a Titan. We see the spiritual advisor on the shoulder in a lot of different types of stories, from a parrot to a friend on your shoulder. Whenever you see this kind of combination, even when the characters are small, you should expect that there to be a Titan later on in the series. And we see this even in the idea of a spiritual advisor, like an angel, which is a play on the angle of the sun, or a demon, which is a play on day moon of the moon. Depending on which way you go, a Titan can be a threat or an indication of doom, or it could be an ally, someone to lift you up or pick you up so you can kind of see the highest form of yourself. And all of this is done is because this is really stories about us. Stories about us under the influence of the moon, in which we're shown that the moon is associated with our growth, where the hour of the moon or the hormones are directly associated with mating, and then also the growing of an individual. And this is also reflected in Titan and Giant stories, where you see the giant or Titan get its power to grow from the moon. And then this is also based off of our spirituality, where our morals come from the moon. The word more, also having to do with multiplication, is also associated with the moon. Black Spider-Man, Miles Morales. So when we have good morals, we're becoming the bigger or better man. I want to reinforce, and I can't stress enough, that these are stories about us under the influence of the moon. And you'll often see the intermingling of the anatomy of the Titan or Giant, which directly reflects our anatomy, and or spirituality, which also reflects us. When we see this going back and forth, whenever there's a giant introduced into a story, we're probably also going to see a tiny one introduced as well, whether it be a child and or a dwarf. Sometimes the dwarf will also be the giant. But this is just a play that these are stories about us. You'll see that in some stories, the giants are actually babies, or the babies become giants, or the babies grow or outgrow the adults. And you see that the characters who are giants sometimes have the mind of a child, where they're having temper tantrums. But there's other stories where the giant is beyond the intellect of a normal human. In one of my favorite video games, Xenoblade Chronicles, a game that takes place on the landscape of giant titans, in which your party and your characters navigate the landscape, which happens to be the body of these giant titans. And this game is made by a company called Monolith or Monolith Software. And the main item in the game is the Monado, the Moonado, the Sword of the Moon. A big portion of the landscape in this game is missing in the original version, only to be added into the later game. You want to guess what part was deleted or cut from the Titan? In these TitanNeck stories, or Titan's neck story, we will often see them getting punctured or pierced at the neck portion to the shoulders, but also the thorax as well. And this is a reoccurring theme that we should apply to giant stories, whether it's a living creature or an inanimate object. It tells the same story about the moon.
Titanic sank because the captain took it full steam into an ice field at night on a moonless night.
Recognize that these inanimate objects are also telling the same stories. When you see a large ship in a story being punctured at the neck portion, you should know that this is also telling you the same kind of story or idea. In closing, we should think about these TitanNeck or TitanNeck stories as references or allegories for the moon. The moon has the power to tell horrible stories or horror stories or moonstar monster stories, but also encodes a lot of great things like growth, our potential to improve our mental status or spiritual status. And you should understand that whenever anyone is misusing these kind of stories to let you know or minimize you, it's a play on these Titan stories. Giants came before you and giants will come after you, or aliens came before you, aliens will come after you. So you're unable to do the things they were able to do, like build pyramids. And understand that these are limiters on your potential. You're the giant. In closing, also, if there's anyone that's online spilling stories about giants, somehow with access to classified information, telling you about the government discovered giants here, there, etc., you should ask yourself, does their name have anything to do with the moon? Remember, there's no such thing as an original story. All stories are a retelling of the stars.